Hi, we'll begin in just a moment. Ask that you mute your lines and when we may have some time for questions. Okay, and we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate everyone's interest since we've hundreds of these cases already, and there's really, there's over 800,000 people who've applied for FEMA for Harvey's, and so that's going to generate a lot of different appeals and go on for some time, although we are starting to see many right now because the first deadline started yesterday. It's just over 60 days since Harvey was declared. The presentation is going to focus on the substance of FEMA Individuals and Households Program. That's the financial assistance that FEMA makes available to individuals. It's important to understand where FEMA benefits fit within the hierarchy for relief and recovery. So initially after a disaster, you see the Red Cross handling shelters and perhaps providing some very short-term needs. And then you've got other voluntary relief efforts that looks different in different communities. So what's available in Victoria, Texas, or Houston, Texas is different than Corpus Christi or Rockport, Texas. It's helpful to be in touch with your local leaders and social service agencies because that can help with immediate needs. And then you look to insurance proceeds. For anyone that does have insurance, they need to claims to figure out what help they can get through those policies because FEMA doesn't want to duplicate those benefits. Business administration loans are available for personal and business use. It's not just for small businesses, despite the name, when they're talking about disaster loans. And it's important that all clients, even if they don't actually want an SBA loan, applying for that is part of the process of seeking FEMA benefits, because if you would be eligible for SBA loans, then FEMA isn't going to duplicate that benefit either. Then you get down on this hierarchy to the FEMA benefits themselves, and beyond that, your clients may be eligible for welfare benefits, some of which are disaster specific, like disaster food stamps, which were available for Harvey, and some of them, they may be eligible for benefits that are available at other times as well. So I'm going to provide with a little bit of information that will be helpful as you refer back to this working on your cases. Where do you find the laws and the regulations, and just some background about what's available. So this is a good resource slide where to look things up as you're dealing with different issues. We've got the Stafford Act that governs all FEMA's programs, and then you have the regulations. There are 10 that pertain to this Individuals and Households Program, as cited on the slide. And FEMA put out last year a document that's about 135 pages long, and it's available on their website. And this is touted as being a comprehensive set of their policies and procedures, but based on what we've learned from some FEMA litigation in the past, we're concerned may still be some internal information or things that they label internal that actually do affect eligibility. But this IHP that is available online is a resource to get the information that you can, what is made public. FEMA's website in general has some information. They've got some frequently asked questions options, so that's another place to kind of research what FEMA's thing is on particular issues that may affect your clients. You can call the FEMA helpline for information. That's phone number 1-800-621-3362. And then for a while after a disaster, FEMA voluntary agency liaisons be actually located within the communities that we're serving. And so then be a good resource and provide you with some information as well. Now, it's important to with FEMA that we're actually going to deal with a couple of different sets of decision makers. All of housing assistance matters are decided by FEMA at the federal level. That's working a bit differently in this disaster, and Texas is going to be more involved in that than most disasters, but more information to come on that. That program is still kind of taking shape. But FEMA always hands over the responsibility for administering the other needs assistance part of its individuals and households program to the state of Texas, because the state of Texas has requested that. Each state has that option for how they want to administer this. And so then we have Texas regulations that have some bearing on the decisions that are made on all the non-housing of this program. And the state has its own handbook that's out a little more detail about what kinds of needs will be addressed. So just for instance, personal property assistance, there'll be some more information on this later, but if people want help replacing damaged clothing, it's this ON handbook that will give you a pretty good sense on if your client's going to be eligible for that or not. It gets into a bit more specifics. And then fair hearing rules that are provided for under Texas regulations are available for a limited amount of the FEMA other needs assistance appeals. There's one level of appeal where you can actually get that kind of telephonic administrative hearing that's not available for any other form of FEMA appeal. All right, so again, we're talking about the Individuals and Households Program. They have a number of different individual assistance programs, but we're focused on this one. This is the financial assistance, the grant program. The two big part of it are housing assistance and then other needs assistance, which is non-housing. The amount you can receive for this program is $33,300 for this disaster. That figure fluctuates from year to year depending on a particular index, but for Harvey, this is the maximum that anyone would be able to receive. All right, there are various forms of housing programs within that housing assistance. Rental assistance for up to 18 months. It's necessarily available for the full 18 months to any particular applicant, though. You have to reapply for that periodically. More information on that to come. There also is an option for direct housing assistance. Direct housing is necessary because financial assistance is not actually going to effectively meet some housing needs. Money to repair damaged homes and to replace destroyed housing. Eligibility requirements. The home to be in the declared disaster area, and it actually has to be their home. So vacation homes in Rockport, those are not going to be covered. The person has to be unable to live in the home now or can't get to the home because of the disaster, or it's going to require repairs before it's livable again. And FEMA relies on their inspectors to determine if the people meet this requirement. Someone in the household must be a United States citizen, legal permanent resident, or to use FEMA's term, a qualified alien. There's a paragraph that describes who may fit within the qualified alien definition. TRLA has a flyer that explains a bit more about that on its website. That's www.trla.org/disasters, and there's disaster relief for immigrants. So if you are wondering whether a particular client fits within that definition or if a household member fits within that definition, that's a good resource. But all immigrants qualify for emergency non-cash help. But here we're talking about this IHP program, which is the cash assistance. Insurance proceeds are going to be considered. Sophie is going to be looking at, what insurance covered and what they didn't, and do they still have some FEMA eligible expenses. FEMA is going to know if they were eligible for an SBA loan, and if that's seeing certain forms of benefits. There is no resource test. Now, this temporary sheltering assistance or transitional self-sheltering assistance, that is available. This disaster, it's not always available, but it's happening now because of the catastrophic nature of the disaster and how many people are displaced. This is a hotel motel assistance, and a direct payment from FEMA to the hotel, kind of a voucher situation, and you have to find participating hotels. So there's a link that a few ago, lots of clients were having a hard time finding hotels to take it. This is where they can try to hunt them down. But it's to the cost of the room only, not different amenities that might have additional charges. We've heard from some clients that a pet is not actually paid by FEMA, even though we'd heard from FEMA representatives that it was going to be paid. So if a client needs that, that's kind of an advocacy point to make sure it's included, because people who evacuate from their homes with their pets and are now displaced with pets, we want them to be able to benefit from this program if possible. This is supposed to be a short-term program. Initially, when FEMA set it up for this disaster, it was supposed to end like September 25th. It was then extended to October 10th and extended again to October 24th. Now I think the deadline is it's November, I think November 7th. So don't know if it's going to be extended again. That's always a worry for different clients who are relying on the program to avoid homelessness at this point. So if you have cases where they're benefiting from this assistance, understand the deadlines for that program, since it may be something you have to advocate for at the end. The agents also generally are announced pretty last minute. We found out, I think this Monday, 23rd, that it was going to be extended beyond October 24th, and so you then end up having to call FEMA to make sure the client benefits from the extension, because it's not automatic for everyone who's in the hotels at that point. Okay, the rental assistance. We have a number of clients who have received rental assistance checks, and they need to understand that's only for rent. It's not something they can, family member who's letting them sleep on their couch. For a security deposit, maybe another social service agency would be able to assist with that. And it's not for utilities that are not included in the rent amount. As I mentioned earlier, it can last for up to 18 months, or if extended by FEMA, but in past catastrophic disasters like Ike, Katrina, usually around that point, FEMA is working with to come up with a different type of program. So the type of assistance available may just be different, and you have different requirements. But right now, clients who have received 2 months worth of rent from FEMA in the form of a check, clients could go line up their own alternative unit, go rent an apartment or rent a house with that money. People are nearing it where they're going to have to recertify. They're going to need to show FEMA, here's the lease where I'm now renting a place, and here are copies of my receipts showing that I have paid rent here for the last 2 months and exhausted most or all of what you've already given me. And they also have to provide quite a bit more documents. We've got a whole separate PowerPoint for that, so anyone who's working on those issues, I can give you more detail. But the bottom line is FEMA wants to compare their pre-disaster income and post-disaster income, disaster expenses and post-disaster expenses, focusing on housing expenses, and they're trying to decide, are you really worse off now? If someone's paying the mortgage for a damaged house and rent now, the same income as before the disaster, they're worse off. That's the kind of thing trying to demonstrate. And FEMA's also going to be interested in, why do you still need help? Why haven't you already covered? Why have you settled into a new permanent housing plan? And so, right now that's going to be an easier standard for many people to meet because it's so difficult for people to be recovering from this event. But as time goes on, that's going to be a critical element of each request for additional rental assistance. Now, this direct assistance, we're very interested to see what's going to develop. FEMA is working with the state of Texas, the General Labor Office this time, and it's my understanding FEMA is going to be deciding eligibility for assistance based on some of the criteria I've just gone over, but then rely on Texas to find out what form of assistance a FEMA applicant actually wants and needs, and then hand that responsibility down to a local government entity or a local entity to actually connect the client with that assistance. So if rental assistance is going to work, a hand check and the client's able to line up a place to live with money, great. But we're finding a lot of clients are not. There's not a lot of housing stock available to rent in a lot of these affected areas, and you have so many displaced individuals. The reality is many of our clients are They're either FEMA voucher hotels, hoping to get something in place before those end. They're living in their cars, or living in their trailers or their homes that are actually uninhabitable, because that's their best option. Some of them are doing that even with rental assistance checks in hand because they cannot find a place to use them. So there's a great need for the direct assistance, which is to be available when rental assistance will cut it. In the past, for instance, after Katrina, you know, people given the trailers or mobile homes to reside in. And hearing that's going to be happening some here, but we're not seeing a lot of clients connected with that yet. And so we're going to keep an eye on the big picture and see when is that going to come down and what are the methods we use to help clients seek particular forms of assistance. Right now, there is a dating game. If they receive this, it doesn't count against that $33,300 though. No home. This is only for owners. Going to help landlords to repair their properties. It is only to return the home to a habitable condition, make it safe, sanitary, or functional. And then tell us in the regulations or in the IPUG, the document that's on their website, exactly what kind of repairs will be eligible. To give us examples, so that could still be helpful, but it doesn't tell us with certain what kinds of things are included. For placement benefits, if the home is destroyed, they get that, but it is not to be expected to pay for actually replacing the home. It would have to be combined with other resources. Now, the assistance. This is only for serious needs or essential items. As I mentioned, it's administered by the Texas Health and Human Services Commission in Texas. And the housing and O&A together, it's still subject to that same cap, even though you have different entities making these decisions on a FEMA application. The types of personal needs that are covered by FEMA Other Needs Assistance. That could be clothing, furnishings, appliances, tools for jobs, educational materials, but it is not to return the property to a pre-disaster condition. It's not, you know, replacement value of the exact items. This insurance. It's to just give enough for to have something functional. If they lost all their furniture in their living room, they would get something to make the room functional again. But it's not tied to value of the property before or what the client hopes to buy now. You can need funds for cleaning and sanitizing the property and vehicles damaged by the disaster. There's related medical and dental costs. There's even funeral costs and that's related to child care. Again, if everyone will please mute their lines so that the recording will be as clear as we make it. And at the end, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself. In storage costs, and for this disaster, a lot of y'all may have heard from clients they've received $500 lump sum for critical needs assistance. $5 was the max anybody was going to get for critical needs assistance. In fact, I think it's the only amount people got. They either received it, depending on how they answered certain questions when they applied, or that heard, and I have not confirmed this with FEMA policymakers. We just heard from FEMA employees that people are not going to be able to appeal decisions denying them critical needs assistance, but I would suggest we try it anyway. I don't know why that decision wouldn't be appealable if you can establish that your client met the criteria for critical needs assistance at the time when it was being awarded. It was available for life-saving or life-sustaining items, and I won't go to everything that's on this slide here, but water, food, that you might need to take care of young children, protein items, transportation. So FEMA had an identity verification process that applies to all applications, but people did have to get through that hurdle before this would be awarded. They, again, had to assert certain things during their registration process to receive this lump sum that they were trying to push out very early on. FEMA's other needs assistance, all the non-housing items, more generally, the losses had to be within the declared disaster area, and insurance coverage, they should be looking to that first before looking at FEMA, and was assistance available from any other sources. FEMA's not going to duplicate benefits that maybe were received from a church that helped with something early on. These all necessary expenses, serious needs, not insurance, not replacement value for things, but what's essential, what's necessary. And just as with the housing assistance component of the program, someone in the household needs to be a citizen, a legal permanent resident, or other qualified alien. I didn't mention this earlier, but should. That person in the household that meets the requirement could even be a child. A parent may apply benefits on behalf of a citizen child and receive benefits for the household. All right, people apply, and I should emphasize the deadline to apply has been extended, so people still have time. If they have not yet done this, they should do it as soon as possible. The application process can be completed online or phone. The application is something that is going to be populated by your answers online or by the answers you give over the phone, but here's some details on the slide about what would be required. The description of disaster-caused losses is very minimal. It's not anything detailed, just stating that there were certain losses to the home or to personal property or to vehicle. The FEMA application number or registration number is all important. When a client applies, they need to make sure they make note of that FEMA application number so that they can follow up with FEMA on that later. It's difficult to get information later if you don't have that number. Generally, there's only 60 days to apply, but if there's good cause, then FEMA can give more time. This disaster, they haven't 120 days, but there has been about a 30-day extension granted. Someone applies, the computer is going to analyze whether certain questions have been answered in a way that prompts them to send out a FEMA inspector, and rely on this to decide whether the home is actually uninhabitable, and then is going to need repairs or is replacement assistance with other property damage like a car or personal property, ownership or occupancy verified. We were hearing pretty recently that there was quite a backlog, so let's see here. Okay. Now, the inspectors don't decide eligibility, and that is correct, but the inspectors are FEMA's fact finders. Most of the initial decisions are automated. Formulas use the information from the inspectors to decide eligibility. So the inspector goes to a client's home, looks at certain documents the client is to provide, looks around the home and at the contents as required, and they're putting certain things into a handheld kind of tablet or computer, and that gets uploaded to FEMA's system. There are a number of different formulas that FEMA relies on, so that 90% plus applications are being cited by those formulas, and then the letters are going out. And that's to expedite the delivery of assistance, but that means that let's ownership proof that the inspector's looking at was a little confusing to the inspector. He says, ownership wasn't verified. That's going to get a denial letter for home repair if that we're seeking that. Same goes for the inspector doesn't think the home had damage according to what they understand about FEMA standards and how to inspect a home. Then inspectors are putting into the computer are going to prompt the client to get a letter saying your home is actually safe to occupy. So the inspection is a very important part of this process. Many clients are displaced, but if at all possible, they should try to be present during any and all inspections so that they can advocate for themselves. Point the inspector's eyes where they want them to go. And explain what damage has occurred, have their paperwork together to be able to show that they occupy the home. They believe they should be treated as the owner of their property. If they can't be there, they should designate someone they trust to handle that because it's so important. Most inspectors are not FEMA employees. FEMA working with 2 companies to provide inspectors to do it quickly and to do it in mass, especially after being as catastrophic as it was, followed very quickly by Irma and Maria. There are many, many people in the field acting as FEMA inspector right now, and each one is making decisions that affect lots of people's applications for assistance. And it's important to understand they only have to pass a criminal background check. They do not have to have any construction training whatsoever. Many do, but they have to, and some do not. So, you know, those who have that kind of training and the ones who don't are having their fact findings to rely upon by FEMA to decide if the client is eligible for forms of assistance. That training on FEMA standards we've heard in the past. I don't know what it is for Harvey. In the past, it's been something like 8 hours of FEMA standards. So there's some concern about whether the decisions they're making are arbitrary or if there is some consistency because they may not all understand the standards they're to be applying well enough. And you're going to hear this from clients you're working with, the FEMA inspectors do not get on ladders. So when our clients are complaining about roof damage and FEMA underestimating the cost of repairing that, you know, how well is the inspector able to evaluate the roof damage? Inspectors also do not get underneath the house. They are going to have a harder time, I would suggest, deciding what damage has to plumbing under the house or foundation shifting, piers and beams shifting rather. So that's something, again, to work into appeals about the quality of the inspection. But just for concerns for inspector safety, this inspector is required to do, and they're not allowed to do these things. In the past, we've heard that there are bonuses for, I think, the contracting companies if they hit certain quotas. So right now, where you have over 100,000 people who have applied for help after Hurricane Harvey alone, and, you know, most of those people, I think, are going to get inspections of some kind or another, and we're helping lots of clients ask for second inspections. A lot of inspections that need to get done. You know, that's why there is this backlog, and it may take 30 days, 45 days for an inspector to get back out there. So we want them to move quickly, but we don't want the inspections to suffer. So listen to clients as they're explaining concerns about how fast they thought the inspector handled the inspection or if they weren't really paying attention to certain details. We've even heard of some inspectors driving by and not getting out to inspect the house closely at all. Also attention to whether there are language barriers for clients that are Spanish speaking or Vietnamese speaking in some of the affected areas near here. An inspector able to communicate with the client directly. If not, I think that affects the client's ability to advocate for themselves in inspection and tell the inspector what they think is important. So I would include that kind of detail in an appeal if there's a concern about the inspector's findings. So once the inspection occurs, the client hears something within 10 days. And if they've given a direct deposit information to FEMA, then if they're getting an award, that could just be deposited and a letter may follow, or they may be getting a letter with a check or a denial. Some clients are finding that things have changed over time, and so need to amend their application to notify FEMA about conditions in the house that the inspector didn't see. Talk about some common problems and advocacy points. Keep in mind, as we're dealing with this, so much bureaucracy that clients are having to deal with as they try to recover from disaster. They applied for the Red Cross benefits and be frustrated that they were denied that. They may have applied with FEMA. Just any different entity that they're having to communicate with, you know, the different hotels or shelters. So this process really wears people down. And or some of them are living in inhabitable homes and in cars, and so just there's a lot of different elements that, you know, are in crisis. Lots of jargon, getting quick letters with codes, even the fact that the state handles half of the FEMA program isn't, in my opinion, communicated very well to clients. So I think just that contributes to the confusion, and kind of get bounced around and told different things. Very well-intentioned employees of these bureaucracies may be giving them conflicting information without realizing it. I hear that from people a lot, and it's frustrating for the clients, and they're not quite sure who to rely on, who to get guidance from. So our role is trying to be that advocate, connect the dots, follow on things to help them, and we have, at Texas Rendezvous Legal Aid, we've handled thousands of these FEMA cases over the last 15 years or so. So based on experience and communication in-house, we want to try to use that knowledge to help our clients and help them not feel so bounced around. A theme seeing this disaster is that if the client is still waiting to hear from FEMA, that does not mean for us to sit back and wait and have them call us when they get a letter. We're waiting on an inspection because there is some backlog, but we've also had several clients who had received electronic notices that they had been denied, and they were checking their online accounts. So that happened because weeks ago when they were applying, it was hard to get through to FEMA on the phone, and they used the online option in order to register for assistance, and they set up an online account and thought that was required, even though it is not. You can register, but they set up the online account and chose an option to receive communication electronically. If they are not checking that regularly, we recommended them that they immediately change their communication preference, that they will receive things in the mail if that's what's actually going to register, but have those electronic notices already. You got to get them in there and print that out or download it or whatever, but review it so you know what is going on in their case and can then help them come up with a plan for how to address it, whether good news or bad news. We've also had some clients who have seen an error in their mailing address, and it may be that there was some error as they typed that in when they applied online, but also people that apply by phone, they're communicating with someone verbally, and someone on the other end of the phone that is working for FEMA is typing it in. So if theirs was typed in wrong, there may be letters going out somewhere, eventually getting returned to FEMA, or maybe going to someone else's home down the street. But there's a concern about whether there's a deadline that's been triggered and a delay in services being available to the client. So if they're saying, I haven't heard anything, we want them to immediately check status, and we help them check status. If they are saying, well, I've gotten decisions on my housing issues, but you haven't heard anything about personal property or transportation assistance, and I told FEMA I had that kind of issue, I talked to the inspector about it, that's a red flag for me. I have to ask them, did you apply for the Small Business Administration disaster loan? Because if they don't, some forms of ONA are dependent on whether they've applied for SBA. FEMA is waiting to hear from SBA whether the person is eligible for SBA or not, and it's not going to keep processing some of the other needs assistance parts of the application without hearing that from SBA. So if a client hasn't heard anything on that, I tell them you need to go apply with SBA immediately. I have to explain to them, if you are offered a loan and you don't want it, you can turn it down. Like if you withdraw your application, you need to apply, and more often than not, my clients, since I represent low-income individuals, are still denied that loan, and then the FEMA application process proceeds. SBA loan application deadline is the same as FEMA's application deadline, so we still have a window of time where people can complete that SBA loan application, but we don't want people to figure out 2 months from now that they need to do that because they'll have missed that chance. To kind of put this in context here, these are pictures from a Dan home for a client who's authorized me to put these out there. These are on a local news story a while back. So he's got this hole in the ceiling in his hallway, and you can see damage to parts of his bedroom wall. This is from a storm in 2015. You can see more damage in the living room. His elderly client, he was on disability and had no insurance. The disaster caused a lot of damage throughout the home, mold, mildew, and we had estimates showing that repairs were going to cost over $10,000. Zero. They told them that they had insufficient damage, and there was a long paragraph explaining what that meant with this code. And this is what we've seen many times in past disasters, and we've filed a couple of lawsuits against FEMA because we're concerned about standards FEMA is actually using in order to inspectors, and have inspectors come up with the findings that lead to this eligibility decision. How does FEMA decide what's disaster related? How does FEMA decide what makes the home unsafe? We're seeing this disaster because there have been changes in the years since we filed some of that litigation. We're seeing denial letters say home is safe to occupy instead of instant damage. So this what clients are seeing in their letters. Question is, how did the FEMA inspector decide that damage wasn't caused by the disaster? Or they agree that the damage was caused by the disaster. How did they decide whether it made the home safe or unsafe? You know, I encourage everybody to, take a look at the FEMA statute and the regulations and what the IPUG, that document on FEMA's website, says about these issues, but it's not clear to us exactly how that's being addressed, and we're concerned that the inspectors are being told more internally, and they don't have that transparency in the standards. We've got clients who are concerned about, why their home is unsafe to live in, and they're having to continue living there, and FEMA is saying, we can't help you at all. We also have clients who are frustrated about the amount of home repair they received. They may have actually received some, but $700 when they need $7,000. And it may result from the operation of the same FEMA standards that produce the insufficient damage or home is safe to occupy denial. So I kind of lump those in together because the appeal, we're using the same types of arguments and documents and considerations for the appeals. And what you're doing in those cases is asking FEMA to send out another inspector. They have these concerns about how the inspector handled the inspection of the home. They didn't look at the roof very closely, or they were dismissive of my concerns. Or even if they thought the inspector was very fair, they'd be concerned, FEMA, what are your standards? How did this happen? Because I have my roof. There's mold in my home. This isn't safe. I have to do that. Kind of an appeal, and I'll move this at the training I'm going to do at 1 o'clock, but you definitely need contractors' estimates, kind of your own expert that's challenging the opinion that the FEMA inspector came up with. You see denials that sound like FEMA saying the client's not cooperating. If it's for any form of assistance, if the FEMA application has been withdrawn, what that says to me, based on the cases I've seen over the years, is that there was a problem meeting with the inspector. The inspector attempts to work with the client to arrange a time for inspection, and they make a certain number of attempts, and the client is not able to be there, we'll consider the application withdrawn. So that needs to be appealed, and the client simply explains why they were not intending to withdraw their application. They do still want help, and just explain they weren't able to meet with the inspector. We've not had problems getting those resolved on appeal, but that kind of language that has been withdrawn is daunting, and I think it's kind of a red herring for some clients. And why I didn't withdraw it. It's simply that they missed the inspection. Rental assistance, people will be denied that because the letter will say they weren't willing to relocate. So that is the prompts us to ask, did the inspector tell them that you have the option to relocate temporarily? If the home is damaged and unsafe to live in, or if it's inaccessible, do you want to relocate temporarily, yes or no? If the client simply asked by the inspector, do you want to relocate? It's not unusual for some of our clients to say, this is my home. I'm not going anywhere. Because then they're wondering, are they being asked to relocate permanently? So just clarifying with the client, this is what they were trying to ask you. Do you really want money to be able to stay in a hotel until you can get your home fixed, or just rent another place until you can return home? We have lots of appeals for people who have had trouble persuading FEMA that they meet FEMA's owner-occupant standard. This is a looser definition than legal ownership, which is good, but they meet it by either showing legal ownership, that's the easiest avenue. They are a life tenant, so you have the documents that would establish that, or perhaps the argument that they are a surviving spouse and they have a homestead interest in the property under the Texas Constitution. That's something that, you know, a lawyer would have to lay out with some cites. You can get help from our probate team that if necessary, just figure out what that argument is, but help people, and that would be something that may need to be addressed in an appeal because it's not straightforward for a FEMA inspector who is trying to decide whether to check off a box, say ownership has been verified or not. The third category of people that could fit this occupant standard, this is where we deal with lots of appeals. This is someone who lives in the home rent-free and is responsible for property taxes or maintenance expenses, and pre-disaster responses. So you can't go pay the property taxes after the disaster and then show that proof, and that won't work. They were responsible in paying them before that, or if they, you know, just made some plumbing repairs 3 months ago. And clients tend to volunteer that information. That's part of the frustration. I just fixed this up, and now look what's happened because of the disaster. You know, keep those things because that's part of the argument. They should be treated as an owner by FEMA because they were acting like an owner, bearing those kind of costs beforehand. Now, title afterward might help, but it depends on your facts, and a loan usually won't resolve it. So, for instance, it helps if someone bought a mobile home 5 years ago and just didn't get the title issue resolved. The mobile home team at TRLA and St. Mary's Law School students are working with us on this have been helping people title to the mobile homes, and when those are issued by the state's agency, they actually say the date of transfer, and it's a date before the disaster. Even though the document has been issued post-disaster, it reflects that ship had transferred at some earlier point, and so I think that's helpful in these appeals. It may not work that way if you're, you know, preparing a deed for someone to sign, but you might have third-party statements. You know, my parent intended for me to have this, and I've always been the one paying the property taxes. I deliver them to my parent. They actually deliver them to the appraisal district, but see statement from my parent under oath saying I've actually been the one paying that money. These were covered, and those need to be notarized. And then probate issues. If someone inherited an interest from their parent but hadn't settled date yet, we ownership arguments. They owned it as of the date they actually inherited it, even though the probate paperwork didn't get done until after. So we've had some successes on all these different fronts, but these can be really because someone has, let's say, $17,000 of damage to the home. FEMA inspector may have agreed that the damage was caused by the disaster and the home is unsafe. They are going to release that money to the client unless they get past this ownership standard. So these, even though they can be a lot of work depending on facts, they can be resolved on appeal, and the client can then get a check very quickly for whatever amount the inspector had actually agreed was damaged. Household rule, and we see different denial codes that all kind of tie in with this, duplicate or linked or same address, but the bottom line is FEMA only pays assistance to one head of household from the pre-disaster residence. So depending on someone's facts, there may be some confusion that needs to be sorted out. Maybe there was a landlord-tenant relationship, or we had roommates and each were independently responsible for certain expenses, but they have the same main address. Or we have clients that you have several acres that a parent owns, and then there's 3 adult children all living in mobile homes on different parts of that parcel land. If they are able to explain and persuade FEMA that they are indeed separate households, then they can each be treated separately for purposes of this program. If you really have situations where you 5 people in the same pre-disaster household and they were displaced and into different because of the disaster, then FEMA can go ahead and give assistance to both, but it's more limited. My example, grandma and grandpa and mom and 3 kids all lived together before the disaster, and grandma and grandpa ended up in one place afterwards, and mom and 3 kids are elsewhere. What in the past is FEMA being willing to give rental assistance to grandma and grandpa and to the mom and kids separately, but the personal property assistance check may go to the grandfather to cover property for the home that they owned. He would be expected to share some of that with mom and 3 kids in order for them to set up their other household. That gets real messy. It's not generally communicated very well, and so we have clients who are upset that they didn't get their share of that money, but that's the way it works, unfortunately. People are denied because they have insurance. Did they? And if so, what cover and what didn't it cover? If they have windstorm and hail insurance but no flood insurance and they had flood damage, you have that point in the appeal. Some clients actually answered some of these questions wrong during the application process, so that may just be an error. They said they had insurance, but really they had car insurance, and they didn't understand the purpose of that question. You also see clients who are denied some assistance because they're non-compliant with the flood insurance requirement. It means that someone who owned the home previously received help, or this applies to them in rental situations, but if they awarded FEMA assistance and live in a floodplain when that award occurs, in the previous disaster, they should add a paragraph in their award letter saying, if you keep this, you're responsible for maintaining flood insurance on this property here on out. And you don't, then it's going to limit the assistance you can receive from FEMA in the future. And if you don't want to be bound by that, return the money in 30 days. That's what I've seen in letters in the last couple of years. So sets those funds, but fast forward 7 years and they have not been maintaining the flood insurance on their own. If they now have flood damage, it's not going to provide home repair assistance for that. Now, they might still get rental assistance and some other types of things, so it doesn't mean don't apply with FEMA, but they need to understand they're not going to get the flood, those things that flood insurance would have covered. If they had windstorm and hail damage from Harvey, then sure, FEMA could still consider helping with that because the flood insurance wouldn't have covered that anyway. But that's the kind of analysis we have to do on those appeals, what might still be eligible for. And if you think FEMA made a mistake and the client actually had not been obligated to maintain flood insurance, that could be an appeal point, but it also does come with the land. So I've had clients who inherited a home from their parents and say, I had no idea there was flood insurance requirement there, but gee, I think when I was a kid, my parents did get help from FEMA after that one hurricane. Well, they may luck getting some of that help now. Personal property, we have a lot of clients who are dissatisfied with the amount they've received. They don't understand why they received a particular amount, and more on a mixed call about how to kind of get details on that to decide whether to appeal. But revisit with your client what personal property was damaged, and you may have to do some research and compare it to the information in the regs and the book that's on loan. But were these items essential? If it's not clear, you just put it there and FEMA's going to decide what they think is essential or serious needs or not. I do adjust client expectations on there. It's not the same as insurance. And if there were appliances that were damaged, estimates can be very helpful on those too. So a stove or refrigerator or washer or dryer that were damaged, those estimates are helpful. Patient assistance, someone saying the vehicle wasn't essential. If you have a worsened household and they had 2 vehicles and only one was damaged, are probably not going to get help because 2 vehicles is essential. But if you have 2 adults in that household and they each need the vehicles for different reasons and one is damaged, then you may be able to get that help. We see people denied because the client have been legal to drive on the date of the disaster, meaning they may not have had it registered with the state, because FEMA will check that, and it may not have had liability insurance. They have to have comprehensive insurance or anything, but they at least had to have the liability insurance as required by the state. Or are the repairs cosmetic? You know, was the paint scratched? FEMA's not going to help with that. But if the side mirror was knocked off, or the car is not drivable because of flooding, then that's the kind of thing that FEMA may be able to help with. And they can receive an award to actually replace the vehicle. It doesn't matter what kind of vehicle. Again, we're not talking replacement like insurance concepts, but that's to replace the car, just something functional is possible, or repairs if that's good enough. Okay, benefits, money has to be used for the intended purpose, and FEMA can ask for receipts later. It is tax-free, it's not to be garnished, and it doesn't count against means-tested aid. Bills, you got declaration under penalty of perjury. There's some other things that really should be included. I'll just use the slide here for people to kind of refer back to. And the decision letters tell you some of this kind of thing too. But you know what the fax number is and registration number. And you have 60 days to appeal and you disagree with. That's the general rule. The regs say FEMA housing matters. That one appeal, once you get the decision back, it's final. But I don't want that to discourage anyone, because for the last 15 years, we have had luck with subsequent appeals. It looks like they would just consider it up to 3 times on these housing categories. We know how that's working for this disaster, but we're going to continue that process of helping people appeal. For the other needs assistance, the state regs provide a different procedure. Again, it starts with that 60 days deadline, but then you can appeal again to agency, and that's where you can request an actual administrative hearing. So if it's the client's second personal property appeal, that triggers a different, more process to make your case. Fee recoupment, we're not dealing with this yet, but we will at some point. If you get the money out quickly to try to meet people's needs, but mistakes happen, and even if it is FEMA's fault, overlooking something, the client provided information and they weren't in fact eligible, we'll come back through those records later and identify what they think was overpaid, and FEMA sent a letter demanding that the money be paid back. And so we can try to help people establish that they were eligible for the money in the first place, so there should be no recoupment. Or if that fails, because sometimes, you know, we'll look at it and FEMA has made a mistake. We know that because of our experience working on the FEMA cases. FEMA gave somebody 2 critical needs assistance awards on accident. The client may not realize that's an error, but that's an error. So we would then not be successful trying to show FEMA they were eligible for the money, but we could still try to advocate for them directly with the FEMA Disaster Finance Center to see that termination of collection. If a client has the ability, they could set up a payment plan promptly. Most of our clients are not in a position to do that if they've got limited income. Some of these overpayments are, you know, they're being asked to repay $10,000 and it's on because they used it for disaster-related expenses years before they were asked to repay it or months before. If they don't deal with it, interest accrues 30 days after that initial demand. Penalties, administrative fees. Here, let me go back. If it's finalized, FEMA is passing it on to the United States Treasury to collect it. So you're looking at administrative offsets, tax returns, garnished wages. So we want to try to protect clients from these overpay demands as much as possible once those issues come up. Helpful resources here. The TRALA page has a lot of one-pagers with information about different disaster-related legal issues, and then disasterlegalaid.org. That one has fill-in-the-blank template FEMA appeals, which I think are particularly useful for attorneys that are trying to figure this out. You would want to beef them up and make them your own, but it could be some guidance as you're just kind of getting started. And the State Bar has a resource manual for attorneys with a lot of frequently asked questions on a variety of disaster-related legal issues. And if you have questions, feel free to contact me, and there's my information. Now, does anybody, we don't have a lot of time, but does anybody have any question they want to ask before we end this call? Okay, I'm not anything, so we will go ahead and end it, and I thank you for your attention.